Now let's take a look at what happens when we import a good. For instance, oil. The United States is a net importer of oil. In this market, we can consider a situation where the domestic price, the price that would prevail in a market where we didn't either export or import oil, would be $90 a barrel, but consider a situation where the world price is just $45 a barrel. That is, there are countries that can produce oil at $45 a barrel for consumption on the world market. Without trade, what we can see here is that domestic producers would produce 400 barrels at a price of $90. And consumer surplus would be triangle A, and producer surplus for the domestic producers would be B and E. Without trade, then, consumers pay $90 for 400 barrels of oil. However, if we open up production to the world, we can see that we're going to import a substantial amount of oil. In the way the diagram shows, we will consume 600 barrels of oil at a price of $45 each. 400 of which we import, and 200 of which we produce domestically. We have production within the home market of 200 barrels at a price of $45. We produce the easiest stuff to produce. But we export an additional 400 barrels for 600 barrels of total consumption and a grand total of $45 per barrel. Now, consider what this says about surplus. In a market without trade, consumer surplus is equal to triangle A. Producer surplus is equal to area B plus area E. But when we open up the market to imports and we see the prices fall, some consumers can now will now choose to consume at the lower price, and total consumption rises from 400 to 600, and we pick up area C and D in additional surplus. Domestic producers lose. Domestic producers give up area B, but domestic consumers gain even more. Domestic consumers gain B plus C and D, and so total surplus rises. It's important to remember that what's happening here is that we're moving beyond our production possibilities frontier. With trade, we're able to experience higher levels of consumption in our import good than we would have otherwise. So let's take a look at a summary then. If the world price is greater than the domestic price, we will export the good. In this case, consumer surplus falls as our producers decide to sell at higher prices to world buyers rather than domestic buyers who are only willing to pay a lower price. But producer surplus rises as total production increases and the price rises. And we note that total surplus rises because the gains to producers exceed the losses to consumers. The reverse is true when the domestic price is greater than the world price. In this case, we import the good. If we can get it cheaper from countries around the world, we should do so. Consumer surplus in this case rises. Producer surplus falls, but again, the gains to consumers exceed the losses to producers, so total surplus rises. Now, comparative advantage in looking at how well we can produce a good relative to the world price will tell us what to import and export. And our exports will generate foreign currency, which we can then use to buy imports. And the combination of exports and imports will allow us to move beyond our individual production possibilities frontier. This international trade will create winners and losers. If you are in an export industry, for instance, the consumers who want to consume those goods will lose out a little bit to foreign consumers who are willing to pay out a higher price. If you're in an import industry, the losers here are domestic producers who fall to competition from foreign producers who can produce the good more cheaply. But we observe from the analysis above that the gains to the winners exceed the losses to the losers. What's happening here is we're moving beyond our domestic production possibilities frontier through specialization and trade. There's often much resistance to international trade that comes from concentrated interest groups. There are consumers and especially producers who tend to be concentrated few individuals that might be very severely hurt by increases in international trade, and those losses are often very apparent. but the gains to consumers are often widespread across thousands of people rather than a few select workers in a few select industries. And so it's often easy to lose sight of the fact that the gains to the winners exceed the losses to the losers when we think about international trade and its ability to increase the size of the pie, that is, move us beyond our production possibilities frontier.